coordinator. And really what that job title means is I do everything BrAPI. I'm a one-man team working for a very large community who I rely on to push me in the right direction. So, first question everyone should be asking, what is BrAPI? BrAPI is a standardized RESTful web service API specification for communicating plant breeding data. So we're going to break into each one of these terms a little bit, just so we can break down what really BrAPI is at its core. So first up, what's an API? So an API stands for Application Programming Interface. And it's a way of controlling software. So I think most of us are familiar with a user interface or a GUI or GUI. That's an interface where a person is interacting with a piece of software, inputting data, receiving data, inputting commands, etc. An application programming interface is the same type of thing, but it allows one piece of software to control another. So it's really more computer-to-computer communications. All right, what is a web service? So a web service is typically a type of API, and usually there are two parts to a service request, and it creates this loop that I've illustrated here on the right. So there's a service consumer and a service provider, commonly known as the client and server. So the service consumer is going to put together a request. In this case, it's sending the numbers 2 and 3. Going to send that request over some network, either the internet or a private network, doesn't really matter. The service provider has provided some endpoint to a service that the client can make requests to. It's going to take in the inputs, run some service, and produce an output, which gets sent back as a response. So every web service will act as this loop with a request, and then a request, a service being performed, and a response.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Pete. We have a few people who are having trouble hearing, although some people say it's quite loud, but is there a way to, I don't know, get closer to the speaker or something? The mic?
I am wearing a headset, so
okay, maybe okay, well, most people are saying they can hear it, but it's very quiet for me.
I think
I can hear you.
Possibly people could call in on the number instead of using their computer speaker if they need to. There is that option.
Yeah, that may be the way to go. Okay, sorry. Proceed, please.
I will try to speak loudly and clearly and enunciate. Okay, yes. So this is the basics of a web service. REST. So REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it is a type or a flavor of web service API. The image on the left here is a tool called Postman, which I use all the time for interacting with RESTful web services. But it's a flavor of web service APIs that is built on the HTTP standard. So HTTP is what we use every day for accessing websites. And so REST is built on top of that, using the HTTP standards to pass data back and forth usually in a JSON format. You can use a variety of formats. XML is acceptable, but generally when you're talking about REST, you're talking about using URLs to make requests and data being returned back in JSON. And the last two from our definition earlier, standardized specification. So this is sort of the key part about BrAPI is BrAPI is, first of all, it's a standardized set of data models. BrAPI acts as a standard within the plant breeding community, so that it's an open standard, so that everyone can use it and follow it. And finally, BrAPI is a specification. It's a technical specification. At its core, there's no tool, there's no application. I can't give you a thumb drive and say, here, this has BrAPI on it, go run it. It is at its core just a specification that defines how the data models should be constructed, and how commands should be issued between pieces of software. So now we can start looking at what different types of BrAPI calls exist. So there's the most basic is just getting information from a server. And there's a couple of examples of URLs that would get information from the BrAPI test server. There are search type calls. These endpoints enable searching functionality, so you can send a more complex search request to a server, have it execute that against its database and return with results. There are ways of adding new data to a server and updating existing data on the server. So this is a sort of an artistic diagram. I was asked to produce something like this for a sales pitch someone needed to do, but I kind of liked it, so I kept it in these slides. This is a visualization of BrAPI version 1.2. There is, current version is BrAPI 1.3, and I'm currently working on 2.0. So this diagram will need to get updated eventually, but it still gives a good outline as to the different types of data BrAPI is designed to handle. Again, because it's artistic, the size and colors of the bubbles don't really mean anything important, but it does sort of show a generalized structure of the entities within BrAPI. So up at the top arm there, we have hierarchical structure for data organization. So at the very top, you can split things into crops, and then a crop will have one or more programs associated with it. A program will have one or more trials associated with it, and a trial will have one or more studies associated with it. A study may or may not have a location associated with it. The central big green bubble there is observation units. These are the sort of big key piece of BrAPI. So an observation unit is anything you're making observations on. So typically that's a plant or a plot, but we've also, within the community, we've been discussing other options for that. So you may be making observations on a field or a tissue sample or something like that. Off to the left, each observation unit is going to be associated with a germplasm or an accession. The germplasm may have a set of attributes associated with it, and it will have a pedigree associated with it. And BrAPI has a set of commands for navigating a pedigree tree. So you're not parsing pedigree strings. You're navigating database entries through the pedigree tree. Off to the right, I'm going to gloss over a little bit. This is the old model for genomic data. In version 2, we're moving to a GA4GH schema. So this is a little bit outdated, but it still gives the general idea of samples being related to observation units, and having matrices that are a combination of samples and markers. And down at the bottom, of course, each observation unit is going to have a set of observations attached to it. And each observation is going to have one observation variable. And we follow the crop ontology setup for observation variable. So each observation variable is split into a scale, method, and trait. And all the ontology is connected to the observation variable in this case, but scale, method, and trait can also be connected to an ontology reference as well.
Peter.
Yeah.
Peter, so this is Taylor Shan. So markers need to be connected to samples and to the some observation unit then?
Well, no. So the matrices, the allele matrices down here is what connects markers. So I'll reiterate, this is an older model and it's flawed, but allele matrices represents the matrices of markers and samples. So markers are indirectly connected to samples through the matrix they may be connected in.
Thank you.
All right. These are the compatible standards that are connected to BrAPI right now. We are compliant with the MCPD passport data, MyAPI. For location-based things, we have GeoJSON set up. A lot more GeoJSON is coming in version 2. I mentioned the crop ontology already, and the GA4GH schema I mentioned already as well. That's a genomic data schema that's actually based, it's a JSON schema based loosely on VCF. So it seemed like a very good fit for BrAPI.
Do you integrate any other ontology besides the crop ontology, like the plant anatomy ontology and the plant trait ontology?
Not yet, but I'm always open to ideas. And I'll say really the crop ontology is connected via structure. So the structure of the ontology data is really what we're taking from the crop ontology, and that variables are created by the set of methods, traits, and scales. Actual data from actual ontology terms, as long as they can fit into that structure, any ontology database could be BrAPI compliant. So this is a question and a misconception I get a lot, and so I wanted to throw this in here as a little extra slide, and it sort of goes in the same direction as the question that was just asked. BrAPI is for computers, so it provides a common language for software to be able to talk to each other. But the representations and the data structures within BrAPI are not intended to be viewed by a final user. The intention is that each software, each piece of software that is BrAPI compliant does its own mapping to its own terms that it uses while interacting with the user. So the little example I have down here is you may have some database field in some database somewhere that's called crop name. For you to map that to the BrAPI standard, that would become common crop name. And then if you wanted to present that to some user using a tool, the JavaScript and the tool might change that to crop. The value of whatever piece of data that represented is going to stay the same throughout that, but the term used to describe it isn't meant to be user facing. So you know, this comes up a lot because of similar to the question that was just asked. You know, have you can we change the BrAPI spec to change this name to that name? And yes, we can, but it doesn't really matter all that much because it's not meant to be user facing. So as long as there's a place to put data that matches up with the synonym somehow, it doesn't really matter what the actual field is called. So I'll touch on a couple of ways. So these are the key things why it's nice to be BrAPI compliant. And the first is more consistent and reliable data sharing. This goes back to the FAIR principles. I put the first bullet in there. Just having an API of any kind makes data more accessible. And some of the groups I've worked with have really used BrAPI as a starting off point just to get an API out into the world for their database. Some groups already have an API and they're just adding to it to become BrAPI compliant. But definitely being BrAPI compliant makes data more interoperable because of the shared community and the shared standard of being able to communicate data in the same way between systems. And the other piece that gets overlooked sometimes but is really very cool is BrAPI allows for a lot of code reuse and being able to share tools. So if you have a client application that gets all of its data via the BrAPI spec, you can, in theory, connect that client application to any number of databases and it'll still work. And you can bring that client application into any number of websites, and as long as the backends for those websites are BrAPI compliant, it will still work. And so there's a lot of community sharing that we can do. Analysis pipelines is another one. If you're getting data for an analysis pipeline using BrAPI, then you can point that analysis pipeline at any number of databases that are BrAPI compliant. Put a couple of examples down there. So perhaps I'll touch on that in a minute. The Fieldbook app, we actually just last month spent some time here at Cornell working on the KSU Fieldbook app and making it BrAPI compliant. So the way Fieldbook used to work is you had to download an Excel file, get it onto your phone, upload it into Fieldbook, and then record your data, and then reverse the process to get it back into the database. There is now a branch of the Fieldbook app that is almost complete that should be able to download data directly from a database that's BrAPI compliant. You use the app as normal, and then you can upload that data directly back to the database without having to mess with data moving around. The vendor project is something we were looking at last year, and I'm still working on every so often, poking at it. this was a concept that came from sample tracking, and basically there's a set of API standards within BrAPI that are meant to be implemented by a genotyping vendor of some kind, so that there's a standard way of communicating sample data to the genotyping vendor. So you can have a whole bunch of sample data, wrap it up in a BrAPI compliant package, send it off to the vendor without having to, again, email them a bunch of Excel files, etc. And there's more details on that. If anyone's interested, I can talk more about that. Generalized search, this is an idea that's come up a few times, and a few different groups have looked into it. You know, if you can build a generalized searching application that is BrAPI compliant, you can point that at any or several or all databases, and be able to search across several different databases simultaneously for any sort of data you're looking for. And I think that that brings me back to BrAPs. So there is an initiative within the BrAPI community to create BrAPs. These are BrAPI applications, and these are little widgets that can be added to anyone's website and can function independently, that are completely BrAPI controlled, completely BrAPI enabled. So we have a few examples up on BrAPI.org. I know there's several more that are being built right now, and I'm hoping to get those up. But this is another way of being able to share and reuse code within the community. All right, let's take a look at some examples. So I think this group is particularly interested in ontologies and variables. So those sort of the examples I wanted to pull up. I've run these ahead of time. Again, this is the Postman tool that I was talking about earlier. I use this all the time for just testing purposes, as a test client. So the crop ontology is BrAPI compliant, so I can hit the URL crop ontology BrAPI v1 variables, and I will get a list of 4,748 variables that are available in the crop ontology database. And they all come in this standard structure here with the traits and methods and scales listed in this JSON structure. Now I can also make this same call BrAPI v1/variables against my test server, and I get back the 5 variables that I have in my test server. And it's the same structure. It looks a little different because the terms are ordered differently, but it is the same structure. You have the methods and scales and traits here. And these are total made up dummy variables for my test server, but it's the same thing. And I did just one more to prove a point. This is yambase.org, which is also BrAPI compliant, BrAPI v1 variables. And again, you have a set of variable information with the scales and traits and methods. So that's showing, you know, with this standard structure, you're creating the same path, the same URL, just against different hosts, and you're getting the same data structure back. So if I were building an application that was for browsing variables, I could point it at a different server, these 3 being the example, and it should work the same no matter what server I pointed it And in fact, this was a good example because someone has done this. So this is a existing page. It is one of the BrAPs on BrAPI.org. It's the variable ontology widget. So you can download this code, put it on your own site, and point it at your own database, and it will work just the same. It'll look just the same. And so all the data that's loaded in this central piece here, the page, it's all coming from BrAPI. So this is pointed at the crop ontology, right? Oh, no, sorry, this is pointed at an INRA database. This isn't even pointing at the crop ontology. And so yeah, all this data is coming from a BrAPI endpoint. This could be pointed at any existing database. I think this could work as well. I might be able to do this, copy that identifier, point it at the crop ontology on that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we got the exact details for the one that was pulled up there. So it's called Frost from the beet ontology. Matches, yeah, beet ontology Frost. Yeah, any questions on that quick little example there? All right. Oh, come on, computer. Wake up. Of course, I get right to the end of my presentation and it stops working. All right. So yeah, time for some shameless self-promotion. We're always looking for more people to join the BrAPI community. The more voices, the better. The more people being BrAPI compliant, the better. Everything BrAPI related is available at BrAPI.org. I maintain that site and update it. If you're interested in joining the mailing list, shoot me an email. I try to put out monthly updates. Sometimes I skip a month here and there, but I try to put out regular updates as to what's going on in the community, what's going on in the world of BrAPI, etc. We do have a Slack channel that link's available at BrAPI.org. And of course, we have regular community hackathons within the BrAPI community. These are generally every 9 to 10 months, not quite once a year. And this is a great opportunity to get everyone together, chat about the standard, see what other groups are working on, see where collaboration can happen. I try to move these community hackathons around the world. So the next one is going to be in India at ICRISAT. Then probably the one after that is going to come back to the Americas, at somewhere in the Americas. So encourage everyone to take a look at that, and please join us if you can. And I think that's about it. I'll open the floor up for discussion and questions.
Hey, thanks, Pete. This is Effie. It's been long a pet project of mine, and I've been trying to get it going. So, do you have examples of data exchange between, for example, with Yambase? I know there are a few other websites that have implemented interfaces between one of these databases and, say, a breeding tool.
I could pull something together real quick.
I just wondering if this has been, it seems to me one of the ultimate goals here is to get data from the public databases into or accessible via breeding tools.
Yeah, so what sort of breeding tool would be best?
Well, some examples, the breeding management system. There's one in Triple called BIMS, Breeding Information Management System.
So BMS is a partner already. They have a BrAPI compliant database. And,
so they have now implemented that.
Yeah, they not fully compliant yet, but they do have several calls implemented that are compliant, and they also implemented a couple of the BrAPs as well. A couple of BrAPs have been added to the BMS site.
Okay. Do you know what databases they're drawing from or connected to?
Not off the top of my head, sorry.
Pete, this is Liz.
Hey, Liz.
So yeah, we do have an example where BMS is pulling data from Gobi, genotypic data from Gobi.
Oh, of course, yeah, that's a good example.
And into their breeding applications to do GBLUPs. And we can also pull data from Gobi and also from BreedBase databases to do comparative maps. That's the app here that Pete's showing at the bottom right-hand corner. And we're also pulling genotypic data into downstream Flapjack web-based tools as well to visualize genotypic data. So we've got quite a few good examples now
of
using BrAPI calls.
So, triple application BIMS is different from BMS?
Yeah, so I can hear you faintly.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Yeah, so triple BIMS is different from BMS. And so we develop BIMS, and BrAPI compatibility is like one of our future thing, near future. Okay.
I have a question. So this is this is from agronomics. So if another breeding software wants to integrate or collaborate with you, like what's the path, or like officially, what do we do? So just.
It's a very good question, and in all my free time, I have a to-do list item to actually write up a first steps or a quick start document to really document this. But I can walk you through it right now. All the documentation for how BrAPI works is available here. Swagger Hub or Apiary are the two best ones for looking. That will explain how to set up the APIs. If you already are familiar with RESTful APIs, if you're not already familiar with RESTful APIs, there's many resources out online describing how to build a RESTful API for any programming language you're working with.
Oh, okay.
So we also have a handful of libraries for R, JavaScript, Drupal, and Java. These are built and maintained by the community. But yeah, there's lots of resources online available for how to build RESTful APIs. Once you're comfortable building a RESTful API, then take a look at the documentation available here to show how to build a BrAPI compliant API. this is my full-time project, so I'm always available to, if anyone has questions, I can help guide, and I can help map, because that's really one of the big first steps that needs to happen. Is you need to look at the data model you're currently using, and figure out how to map those terms and those data elements to the BrAPI standard.
Okay.
Once you're able to map your data to the BrAPI standard, then there's some basic just coding effort to build that RESTful API in the BrAPI standard, and then I mean that's really it for requirements. Then you're off and running with the community and can either share tools. We also have a BrAPI validator application that's available, so that can validate the data source to make sure that it is still BrAPI compliant. Yeah, the world is your oyster after that.
Okay. All right. So like if there is a what about like confidentiality issues? Like for example, I have some data in my software, but I don't want to make some things public. Would that work?
Yes. So the BrAPI standard itself does not dictate any particular authentication or authorization standard, but it does actually built into the standard is token-based authorization. So for every single BrAPI call, there is an expected authorization header as part of the request, and that should be a token that should be checked by the server for every single request. So
okay,
that's available. Some servers are just public servers, like the ones I was showing, and they don't have any authorization, so they don't even check.
But if it's not public, then it's also possible to. Okay.
Yeah, it's
okay.
based on that token you can block.
Okay.
That also I'll put on top of that, BrAPI does not care where that token comes from. That's not part of the standard.
Okay.
But I have before this I was working in the financial industry, so I have some experience with authorization and tokens, etc. So if you'd like to, if you have any questions or want to help laying out what an authorization structure might look like, I'm available for that as well.
So if I speak with my team and then we have specific questions, we might email you. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Peter, this is Rex Nelson with Soybase. I've got a couple questions. First of all, two that pertain to your data model, which I haven't spent a lot of time with. So I'm going to ask a couple stupid questions. How does BrAPI handle missing data? And how does BrAPI handle data that is outside of the BrAPI model?
So missing data is a difficult question. Most fields within BrAPI are optional according to the spec, but they may not be optional according to whatever use case you're specifically looking at. So according to the BrAPI spec, the only things that are required for most objects are an ID and a name. All the other metadata is considered optional as far as the BrAPI spec is concerned. However, in most use cases, that's not going to be very useful. So in that, often missing data and how to handle missing keys or empty strings, etc., that needs to be a conversation between development groups when you're trying to put together a use case for using BrAPI to talk back and forth. That's most often what ends up happening.
And the last question is, so I go through the trouble of making a one or more BrAPI compliant RESTful services. How do I tell you about it?
Real quick, I will touch on the second question you asked, which was additional data elements. And I think almost every object within BrAPI has a additional info object. So there's the BrAPI compliant section, and then there's an additional info object where you can put whatever you want in there for extra data, depending on the use case you're looking at. In terms of telling me, that's a good question. I'm always willing to hear about new community members. If you'd like to join our community page and put your logo up on the partners website, all I need is a logo. Ooh, that's not good. Try again. Okay, apparently this page needs fixing. Anyway, if this were working and not a live demo, this would have all the different partners and different projects that are working on BrAPI related things. There we go. So you can certainly send me your logo and I could put it on this page. In terms of showing that you have a BrAPI compliant system to the rest of the community, we have, I mentioned the Brava tool, and this has a list of public databases that are BrAPI compliant right now. There are several more that aren't on this list because they're private, and so they didn't want to put them on this list, but this list is available. And so those are two options for telling me about it and telling the rest of the community about it. Unfortunately, the way this works, because it's an open project and an open specification, I'm sure there are people out there who have implemented BrAPI that I've never talked to or ever heard of before. So I don't have a master list of everyone who has a BrAPI compliant system, just because I'm sure that there are people out there who never told me. So if you'd like to tell me, I'd appreciate it, but it's not a requirement.
And one other quick question. When we say BrAPI compliant, does that mean we have to have the full complement of services, or can we like put up one service?
So you can put up one service, you can put up as many as you want, and as long as the data structures match, that is considered BrAPI compliant. There is one service in BrAPI called the calls call, which defines all of the other services that are available via BrAPI. And so my joke to everyone is, as long as you implement the calls call and say you implement no other services but the calls call, that is BrAPI compliant, because people should be able to go look at your calls call and say, there are no other services available here. So that is BrAPI compliant.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So I can understand that you have data from public databases that anybody would want to use, for example, genome data, and then is it just a storage data, is a database, or is there like can I do some kind of analysis there, like a GWAS, or like mine a genome and then have an output like a summarized data and not the whole genome, some things like that?
BrAPI itself is just a communication standard. So as long as there's a way to communicate, you know, if you have an analysis tool and you have a data source, they can communicate via BrAPI. Now, I will say with GWAS and other analysis things, BrAPI was built and designed very focused on raw data. So there isn't a really good way yet of communicating post-analysis data. So for many of the tools we're talking about, it would be collecting, you know, if you're talking about analysis, it would be use BrAPI to collect a bunch of raw data and then run it through your analysis pipeline once you've collected it via BrAPI.
So, for example, if I have a genome sequence that could deposit in BrAPI and then call it into another software for analysis?
Sure, yep.
Okay. So how does this link to, for example, like there used to be like other genome repositories, such as like in European or some other platforms where like traditionally there are some sequences submitted when you publish. So is it related to those?
I don't know of any that are BrAPI compliant.
Are you talking about, you know, NCBI and
NCBI, some things like that? Yeah, how do that's really
all
relate to you?
all genomes should go in there first.
Huh?
All genomes should go into those repositories.
First, okay, that's what I was missing. Okay. So that would be the first step. Okay, still okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
There are worldwide databases that NCBI, EBI, and
Yeah, EBI. Yeah.
DDBJ in Japan. They their data, and that's where all the sequence data should go in the world.
Okay. So this is more like collecting like a big info. For example, like with I've worked on YAMS a bit before, and I saw on YAMBase there are the genome sequences, maps, germplasm, everything is there together. So that's the idea here. Like
so think of BrAPI. Think of BrAPI as a communication standard. You can think of it like a file type, almost.
Okay.
It's just
Okay,
it's a way of moving data from one application to another without user intervention.
Okay. Okay, I think I can take it from here with the documentation. Sorry, I came a bit later. That's why I have to ask some silly questions.
No worries.
Thanks. Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
This is Lisa Harper. I really appreciate your talk. Thank you so much.
Of course, anytime.
Not hearing any more questions. There's some thank yous in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, like I said, you know, this is my full-time gig. I'm here to help. So any BrAPI related questions you have, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, I had one more. And this is a bad question to ask for this kind of a project, but do you have a estimate when your 2.0 will come out?
Yes, December.
Oh, wow. So it's close.
Yeah. So there's, it was supposed to be out last week. I haven't. Well, no, not 2.0, but I've been very busy. I'm trying to put out a developer preview for 2.0 because I have the basic structure and I know what it's going to look like. There's going to be some more tweaks before December, but I'm very, very close to putting out a developer preview on BrAPI.org for what 2.0 is going to look like. And then there'll be a few more tweaks, and then by December will be the formal release.
Excellent. I think I'll have to join your mailing list. Okay, any more questions?
David LeBur is causing trouble. What's up, David?
I'm sorry for causing trouble. But I was curious if you could mention, so Cyril mentioned something about BrAPI being a standard for harmonizing data adopted by this European consortium that I'm not terribly familiar with, but if you could mention that, and if you know the scope, I'd appreciate understanding what that is.
I mean, I don't know the full scope. I'm actually going to Paris in November to actually spend some time with them during the biohackathon then, and hopefully get a better idea of the scope for what Cyril's working on. I know within Emphasis and Elixir, they have several different projects going on right now that are BrAPI compliant. I'm totally spacing the big one off the top of my head, but yeah, they are a bit, Cyril and his group at INRA is a big part of the community.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries.
Okay, a couple minutes early. Or yeah, we've got a couple more minutes, but if there are no more questions, we could actually end a couple minutes early.
Sure. All right. Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Hey, Ethy, or is Rex, are you still on?
I'm here.
I missed what Rex said in the beginning. I couldn't get my audio right away. Was Rex?
Was that about?
I'm here.